Every rice explained. Rice feels like the most boring possible topic until you actually start looking at it closely. And then, it turns out to be one of the most quietly consequential foods humans have ever domesticated. More than half the people on the planet eat rice as a staple food, and it's been that way for thousands of years, across cultures that otherwise share almost nothing in common. Here's the thing more people should just admit. Rice is not one uniform product with a few cosmetic variations. It's an entire universe of distinct grains, each shaped by a specific starch structure, growing region, and centuries of cultivation aimed at a very particular texture on the plate. There are more than 100,000 distinct rice varieties cataloged in seed banks around the world, and the handful that show up in your grocery store are barely a sliver of that. Let's get into it.
Long-grain white rice. Long-grain white rice is, in a very real sense, the default rice across most of the world. The workhorse grain with a slender shape roughly 4 to 5 times longer than it is wide, and a light, dry, separate texture once cooked. That texture comes down to starch composition, since long-grain rice is relatively high in a starch molecule called amylose, a straight-chain type of starch that resists binding tightly together during cooking. When you cook long-grain rice, the amylose keeps each grain from sticking to its neighbors, which is exactly why a properly cooked pot of long-grain rice fluffs apart with a fork instead of clumping into a solid mass. That same structure is why long-grain rice is the standard choice for pilafs, fried rice, and dishes where distinct separate grains actually matter to the final result, since a stickier rice would turn those dishes into a gummy mess. Long-grain rice has been cultivated for thousands of years across South and Southeast Asia, and it remains the single most widely traded rice category in the world today, forming the backbone of global rice exports out of countries like India, Thailand, and Vietnam. Basmati rice. Basmati sits at the aromatic, elegant end of the long-grain spectrum, grown almost exclusively in the foothills of the Himalayas across northern India and Pakistan, where the cooler climate and mineral-rich soil are credited with giving it its signature nutty floral fragrance. That aroma isn't just a coincidence of terroir. It comes from a naturally occurring compound called 2-acetyl-1-pyrroline, the same aromatic compound responsible for the smell of fresh popcorn and toasted bread, which basmati produces at levels roughly 12 times higher than ordinary rice. Basmati also has one of the more unusual cooking behaviors of any rice variety, since the grains elongate dramatically as they cook, sometimes stretching to nearly twice their raw length while staying relatively thin, which gives cooked basmati that distinctive long, slender look on the plate. Aged basmati, rice that's been stored for a year or more after harvest before it's sold, is considered meaningfully superior by many cooks, since the aging process reduces moisture content and is believed to intensify both the aroma and the grain's tendency to stay separate and fluffy after cooking. Jasmine rice. Jasmine rice, native to Thailand and named for its faintly floral, almost sweet aroma rather than any actual jasmine flower involved in growing it, occupies a slightly softer, stickier middle ground compared to basmati. It carries a lower amylose content than basmati or standard long-grain rice, which means the grains cling together just enough to eat comfortably with chopsticks or scoop up with other food, while still keeping enough individual structure to avoid turning fully mushy. Thailand protects the name closely, and the most prized variety, Thai Hom Mali, is grown specifically in the country's northeastern provinces under conditions that are believed to concentrate that same aromatic compound found in basmati, though at different levels, and alongside a distinct set of flavor compounds that give jasmine rice its own recognizable sweetness. Jasmine rice has become so central to Southeast Asian cuisine that Thailand today remains one of the largest rice exporters on Earth, with jasmine rice specifically representing a significant share of that trade. Arborio and carnaroli. Arborio rice, grown primarily in Italy's Po Valley, sits at the opposite end of the starch spectrum from basmati and jasmine, since it's specifically bred to be extremely high in amylopectin, a branching starch molecule that releases readily into cooking liquid and creates a naturally thick, creamy texture. That's exactly the quality that makes Arborio the traditional choice for risotto, since slowly stirring the rice while gradually adding warm stock encourages that surface starch to release continuously, building the dish's signature creamy consistency without ever adding actual cream. Carnaroli, a related but generally more prized Italian variety developed in the 1940s by crossing older Italian rice strains, carries an even higher starch content and a firmer grain structure that holds up slightly better against overcooking, which is why many professional Italian chefs consider carnaroli a technical step above Arborio for risotto specifically, even though home cooks reach for Arborio far more often since it's easier to find. Bomba rice. Bomba rice, grown in Spain's Valencia and Calaspara regions, is the traditional rice for paella, and it earns that role through an unusual structural trait. Bomba grains can absorb up to 3 times their volume in liquid without turning mushy or splitting open, meaning the rice can soak up an enormous amount of concentrated broth and flavor while still holding a distinct separate bite. That absorption capacity comes from the grain's dense internal starch structure, which expands significantly under heat and moisture, but resists the kind of breakdown that would turn a lesser rice variety gummy under the same conditions. Bomba is also a notably lower yield crop compared to other Spanish rice varieties, which keeps it meaningfully more expensive, but paella cooks widely consider that cost worth paying specifically because Bomba is so forgiving of the slightly longer uncovered cooking process traditional paella requires. Sushi rice. Sushi rice, more precisely a short-grain japonica variety, is defined by its short, almost round shape and an even higher amylopectin content than Arborio, which produces that distinctly sticky, cohesive texture essential for rice to hold together in a roll or nigiri without falling apart. Unlike most rice on this list, sushi rice is never served plain, since it's traditionally seasoned right after cooking with a mixture of rice vinegar, sugar, and salt, a process called sushi-zu, which not only flavors the rice but also adds a light glossy sheen and helps preserve the rice's texture as it cools to room temperature. Japan cultivates dozens of distinct japonica cultivars specifically bred for sushi use, with regional rice competitions held annually to rank varieties on stickiness, sheen, and flavor, a level of rice connoisseurship that treats individual cultivars with something close to the same reverence. Wine regions apply to grape varietals. Brown rice. Brown rice isn't a distinct variety at all, it's really any rice grain, long, short, or otherwise, that's had only its outer inedible hull removed while keeping the bran and germ layers intact, the same layers that get polished away entirely to produce white rice. Because that bran layer stays on, brown rice carries meaningfully more fiber, B vitamins, and minerals like magnesium than its white counterpart, along with a noticeably chewier texture and nuttier flavor that comes directly from those retained outer layers. That same bran layer is also why brown rice takes considerably longer to cook and spoils faster in storage, since the natural oils in the bran and germ are prone to going rancid, which is precisely why white rice, with those oil-rich layers stripped away, became the more commercially practical option as rice trade expanded globally centuries ago. Black rice. Black rice, sometimes marketed as forbidden rice, gets its deep purple-black color from anthocyanins, the same antioxidant pigment family responsible for the color in blueberries and purple potatoes, concentrated specifically in the bran layer of the grain. Its nickname comes from a persistent historical claim that black rice was once reserved exclusively for Chinese emperors and forbidden to common people. A story that's difficult to verify with hard documentation, but that stuck firmly to the grain's modern marketing regardless. Nutritionally, black rice tests among the highest of any rice variety for antioxidant content, with some research suggesting its anthocyanin levels rival those found in blueberries gram for gram, and it cooks up with a distinctly nutty, slightly sweet flavor, along with a texture chewier than white rice but generally softer than most brown rice. Red rice. Red rice, grown in regions ranging from the Camargue in southern France to Bhutan and parts of Southeast Asia, gets its rust-colored hue from a different concentration of pigments in its bran layer, and like brown and black rice, it retains that bran rather than having it polished away. Camargue red rice specifically grows in the marshy wetlands of the Rhone River Delta, a region better known for its wild horses and flamingos, where the rice absorbs a noticeably earthy, slightly mineral flavor that French chefs often credit to the salty, silty soil unique to that delta. Bhutanese red rice, by contrast, grows at high altitude in the Himalayas and cooks up softer and stickier than most other red rice varieties, and it remains one of the only staple starches native to Bhutan's traditional cuisine. Wild rice. Wild rice, despite the name and the grocery store shelf it usually shares with other rice, isn't a true rice at all. It's the seed of a completely different aquatic grass genus, native to the Great Lakes region of North America, where it's held deep cultural and spiritual significance for Ojibwe and other indigenous communities for centuries as a sacred hand-harvested food. Traditional wild rice is still harvested by hand from canoes, with harvesters knocking the ripe seed heads into the boat using a pair of sticks, a method that's remained largely unchanged for generations, specifically to avoid damaging the plant's ability to reseed itself for future years. Nutritionally, wild rice carries meaningfully more protein than true rice varieties, along with a distinctly chewy texture and deep, smoky, almost tea-like flavor that comes from a natural roasting or parching step most wild rice undergoes after harvest to loosen the tough outer hull. Parboiled rice. Parboiled rice, sometimes labeled converted rice, goes through a specific pre-milling process where the unmilled grain is soaked, steamed, and then dried before the hull, and bran are removed, a technique that pushes nutrients from the bran layer inward into the grain's starchy core before that bran gets polished away. That process gives parboiled rice a distinctly golden, slightly translucent color in its raw form, along with a firmer, more separate texture once cooked, since the steaming step partially gelatinizes the starch in a way that makes the final grain more resistant to overcooking and clumping. Parboiling actually dates back thousands of years to ancient India, where early evidence suggests the technique was developed specifically to make rice easier to hull by hand, and it was only much later in the 20th century that its nutritional advantages were more formally recognized, and it became commercially popular in the West under brand names built around the word converted. Glutinous rice. Glutinous rice, also called sticky rice or sweet rice depending on the region, contains essentially no amylose at all, made up almost entirely of amylopectin, which produces an intensely sticky, dense, almost translucent texture once steamed, dramatically more cohesive than even short-grain sushi rice. Despite the name, glutinous rice contains no actual gluten, since that term refers purely to the sticky, glue-like texture of the cooked grain rather than the wheat protein most people associate with the word. It's central to cuisines across Laos, northern Thailand, and parts of the Philippines, where it's traditionally steamed in a woven basket rather than boiled, and it's also the base ingredient for a huge range of dishes that lean into that stickiness deliberately, from Thai mango sticky rice to Chinese zongzi, the bamboo leaf-wrapped rice dumplings traditionally eaten during the Dragon Boat Festival. Calrose rice. Calrose rice, developed in California in 1948 by crossing existing short and medium grain varieties, was specifically bred to thrive in California's Sacramento Valley climate, and it quickly became the dominant rice variety grown across the American West Coast. Its medium grain structure lands it in a genuinely versatile middle ground, sticky enough to work reasonably well for sushi in a pinch, but distinct enough to hold up in a rice bowl or side dish without turning fully gummy, which is part of why Calrose became the default rice across Hawaii, where it's simply called local rice and shows up alongside nearly every plate lunch. California today produces the vast majority of medium-grain rice grown in the United States, almost entirely thanks to the success of that original Calrose breeding program.
At the end of the day, rice covers an almost absurd amount of ground for a plant that starts as a single, unremarkable-looking seed. A hand-harvested canoe full of wild rice pulled from a Minnesota lake and a bag of parboiled rice engineered in a mid-century food science lab are, in their own strange way, both chasing the exact same basic outcome: a starchy, satisfying grain shaped by whatever a specific culture, climate, and centuries of trial and error decided that grain should become. That's really the through line connecting everything here, from a single strand of aged basmati stretching out in the pot to a dense, glossy scoop of sticky rice wrapped in a bamboo leaf. Every single variety on this list ended up looking and cooking the way it does because someone, somewhere, spent generations nudging a wild grass toward a very specific texture on a plate. Whether it's a quick bag of long-grain rice thrown in a pot without a second thought, or a slow, deliberate risotto built one ladle of stock at a time, rice offers both ends of that spectrum just as well as tea and potatoes do. People who go out of their way to explore beyond the one bag of rice they grew up with tend to notice something interesting. The world got a lot bigger, one grain at a time.